Our school can't hire teachers because they don't have daycare. The hospital can't hire nurses because they don't have daycare. It's a huge problem.
There'll be a lot of kids without quality care, that I do know.
You could have no kids, you could hate kids. But the fact is that childcare matters to everyone in American society.
I'm Julie Rose, and this is Top of Mind. I have been a radio journalist for 2 decades, but a few years ago, I found myself avoiding the news for long stretches because of how depressing and divisive it all seems. I still wanted to be informed and engaged on important issues, though, and I figured I couldn't be alone in that. So we created this podcast. Each episode, we tackle one tough topic in a way that will challenge you, help you feel more empathy, and empower you to become a better citizen, a kinder neighbor, and a more effective advocate. Today, the struggle for childcare and why it matters.
I open at 6:30 in the morning. We cook breakfast, talk to our parents if they have any questions for the week. And then staff come in.
Wantaria Brown owns a childcare center in Hopewell, Virginia called Kids with Goals Unlimited.
Shh, lay down. Sorry.
We caught her during one of the few moments of calm in the day.
It's nap time. They laid on the cots. They're sleeping. So one's up. Lay down, Bryson.
Mondays are the toughest.
They spent all weekend. They had fun. They got to come back to daycare center. And then, I don't want to come. I don't want to do anything today. And they're crying. And I got another one crying. And I have another one. And it's like, I was like, okay, guys, it's going to be okay. I'll pick you back up. No, she'll always come and get you every day. Yes. But I want to go home. I want to go back inside and play. We go outside and play later. Let's get through this lesson. We'll go outside, I promise. You want a sucker?
Brown and her staff of 5 care for 75 kids that are mostly infants and preschoolers. She's always on call, always worrying, keeping one eye on the camera feed set up so parents can check on their kids during the day.
We're not closed summertime. We're open throughout the year. And for me, I really can enjoy my vacation because I'm always on my cameras, even when I'm on vacation. I cannot rest until my doors close. I'm so anal about my kids' safety. I have to go somewhere with internet because I have got to be looking at my cameras. Why so-and-so not at work? What's going on over there? This is not what we do. I blow the phone like, okay, let me pick the speakerphone because it seems like they only listen to Miss Brown's voice, nobody else.
Staffing is a perpetual challenge. The most she can afford to pay and keep the lights on is about $17 an hour. Minimum wage in Virginia is $12.
Hiring is no problem. It's the keeping staff. I'm telling you no lie. I swipe my card to cover payroll sometimes. So that was a lot. I couldn't afford to pay my own bills and swipe my card to cover payroll. If you can't deal with the parents or the children, if you in it to get money, this is not a field for you. It's not about how much you can get, but what you can give back to a family. That's straight up, period.
Childcare is a top concern for millions of families in America. More than 2/3 of children under the age of 6 live in a household where all available parents work. And in most communities, there's a shortage of slots in childcare centers and home-based providers. Because of unreliable childcare, as many as 100,000 Americans are forced to stay home from work at least once a month, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And don't even get parents started on the cost. Childcare eats up about 13% of an American family's income on average, sometimes rivaling what they pay for food, utilities, or even rent. But if there's so much demand for childcare in America, why aren't entrepreneurs flocking to meet that demand? Well, the bottom line is the numbers don't work. If childcare providers charged what it really cost to have trained professionals feed, protect, nurture, and instruct all the kids in their care, day in and day out, the price would be many times what families are already struggling to pay. Keeping prices within reach of families means paying staff less, since payroll is the main line item in any childcare center's budget. But childcare workers are already among the lowest paid employees in the nation, with a median wage of $14.60 an hour. Like Wantaria Brown said, you don't go into this business to make money. The real trick is staying open at all, which is why half of the U.S. population lives in what's called a childcare desert. So today, on Top of Mind, what does all of this mean for families and communities, including those of us who don't need or want childcare?
I'm one of the 4 childcare centers in Hopewell.
If Wantaria Brown were to call it quits in her Virginia community,
there'll be a lot of kids without quality care, that I do know.
Brown started Kids with Goals Unlimited because of her own problems finding childcare. The accredited sites were generally full, and home-based providers felt risky to her. She and her husband ultimately found a spot for their 2 girls, paying around $285 a week in total.
But that was still kind of a struggle. Cost of living is high now. You can't make enough one income. This is not the 1950s, 1960s. Dad goes to work and mom stay at home. I wish I could be a stay-at-home mom. I tried it, and some bills are going to be left unpaid. It's a struggle out here right now, but nothing's going down. Everything's going up.
To boost their household income, Brown went to nursing school. She'd spent years working as a nursing assistant already. And around graduation time in 2019, 2 classmates approached her about starting their own daycare.
I was like, I know what the struggle is, having a nail good job as a nurse, but still not making that money to pay for childcare. What can I offer that nobody else can offer? I love special needs. I love taking care of people who have intellectual, disabilities. So a lot of parents are struggling to accept their child might need other attention, like speech. Your child might be on a spectrum. I may see that and observe that and can help you get into a doctor sooner, being that I've been in the medical field for a good 12 to 14 years. I made my connections with doctors. I can get you through to people based on my connections. And also the resources, too, I can, offer a child.
But soon the brutal economics of the business became clear. Both her partners bailed out.
This all happened during COVID, and then it left me paying the mortgage, $1,000 out of my own pocket, and $1,000 from the daycare. And all the food I bought. So I was $18,000 in the hole my first year of my own money.
To cover the gap, she worked nights as a nurse.
I'll work 30 hours a day. I know it's 24 hours in a day, but I will work 30 hours without getting any sleep. So I will leave one job, go home, take a shower, go to my nursing job, leave the nursing job, come here, wash my face, and start teaching my class. For me, it was a thing of keeping my prices low. I wasn't on payroll. So my pay came strictly from my nursing job. So I could be able to, I'm gonna increase my prices because I have a job that can pay my bills.
The poverty rate in Hopewell, Virginia is nearly double the U.S. average. So Brown knew she couldn't charge much more than $100 a week per child when she started out.
So that included food, a curriculum, a nurse on staff, and cameras access. That was cheap.
And pretty much impossible to make work. Now, the federal government and many states offer child care subsidies in addition to the Head Start preschool program for low-income families. Brown's clients in those first several years were largely families who made just a little too much to qualify for that help. The pandemic brought some temporary relief. Congress pumped $3.5 billion into child care centers to keep them open so essential workers could have a place to send their kids. But the real lifeline for Brown came when she figured out how to tap into Virginia's statewide child care subsidy program for families with a wider range of incomes.
All I have to do is keep my credentials up, make sure that I'm doing and following by state policies for me to keep these grants coming in.
Those subsidies have allowed her to raise rates high enough that she no longer works that full-time nursing job on the side. She's now charging between $200 and $230 a week, depending on the child's age.
And that's still, I think I'm $20 or $30 cheaper than somebody else down the road. So I try to stay like that. But for right now, I'm not going no higher. That's my price.
Since child care centers that offer education are eligible for more state funding, Wantaria Brown is now in expansion mode, chasing the possibility of a sustainable business model.
Our first year doing kindergarten this year, it was successful. And now more kids coming in calling me to taking their kids out of school who's homeschooling their kids with us next year. So it's all about what you promote. And then next year, we're building on to our new building up top. It'll be 3 different classrooms. So my bigger goal is to buy the lot behind us and have a whole certified school and have a daycare center plus a school. I tell all my parents, all my staff who come into me, I don't babysit anybody's, kids. I don't sit on people's kids. I don't babysit. So when you come in here, you're learning. We're developing your soft skills. We're learning our names, spelling our names. I'm trying to do my best to make a teacher in kindergarten life easier by having a child at least know their letters recognition, their numbers, writing their name, their first and last name.
Why did you stay open through all of that? Why didn't you just close it down?
I love what I do. And then you have that one child, couple kids that say, Ms. Brown, I love you. And be like, when you want to give up? And it takes you a long way. That simple thing, or a parent cry on your shoulder thing, Ms. Brown, you're awesome. It's a long way.
Thanks to Wantaria Brown for giving us a peek inside her life as owner of Kids with Goals Unlimited in Hopewell, Virginia. While she's serving mostly low-income families relying on government subsidies, the childcare bind in America is just as tight elsewhere on the income ladder.
It is truly one of those issues that unless you are very, very rich, childcare is a problem.
Next, why most middle-class families struggle with childcare too, and how that ripples out to the rest of society. I'm Julie Rose. This is Top of Mind. Hey, it's Julie. There is another podcast I think you're going to like from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, so I wanted to pass along the word. It's called In Good Faith. Join host Stephen Cat Perry as he connects with believers from various religions, Christians, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, and much, much more. Listening to their captivating stories is an opportunity to deepen our own understanding of faith, religion, and spirituality. Plus, Stephen is really well-traveled, and his global perspective brings a unique richness to each conversation. Elevate your appreciation for the divine with In Good Faith. It's an inspiring journey of unity and enlightenment. Listen anywhere you get podcasts. Elliot Haspel and his wife were in their 30s, living in San Francisco, when their first daughter was born.
We both have graduate degrees. We both were working, solid jobs. And childcare was just like crushing our budget. It was crushing our ability to stay in the city where we were living in. We were in like a 1-bedroom apartment. We're like, okay, our baby is now 6 months old, starting to get mobile, right? Starting to thinking about crawling, like we need to start thinking about moving to a larger place. And the mix of housing and childcare literally didn't work. Like even if one of us had stayed home, we would have lost that income, and then we wouldn't have had enough money to pay for the housing. And if both of us were working full time, then we didn't have enough money to pay for the childcare.
So did you move to the suburbs and just commute into your work in the city?
Yeah, we tried that for a year. We moved out into the suburbs for a year and tried commuting that. And then we ended up leaving California altogether and moving to Virginia, actually, where I had some family. So we were sort of lived out that story of having to completely decamp largely because of childcare, which was really, a shame. I think that was a community we had invested a lot in. We were involved in the local faith community. We were volunteering, on local political campaigns and at a local school. Like we were enmeshed in the community, and it really was a loss for us. And, I kind of dare say like there's something lost to the community as well when you have families uprooting who are part of that civic infrastructure. Again, this is not just an urban issue. In rural areas as well, we have studies and stories of families that are basically saying, like, I love this place, like, I want to live here. I cannot find and or afford childcare, so I have to move to be closer to family member or to be closer to an area that has more supply. And it's a real shame when that is what is driving family decisions and family self-determination, not desire, not preference.
Motivated by that experience, Elliot Haspel has become a leading expert on childcare policy. He's now a senior fellow at the think tank Capita and author of the book Crawling Behind, America's Childcare Crisis and How to Fix It, where he makes the case for a universal government-funded childcare system. Because, Haspel says, the costs to a family of this current system are not just financial.
It can force parents into work care situations they don't actually prefer, so having to pick up an additional shift in order to pay. I have many parents that I've talked to, particularly those that are sort of more kind of quote-unquote working class, work what's known as laddered shifts, right? So one parent is working the morning shift and then they come home and then the next partner goes and works the afternoon or evening shift, so someone's always home to provide childcare. And again,
but the family's never together.
They're never together, exactly.
Yeah.
And I should emphasize, like, I always want to say, like, if that's what a family wants to do, if they're willing to say, like, okay, like, that's actually our preferred situation, fine. But for many families, that's not, right? That's not actually, they're sacrificing that quality time together. They're sacrificing family time in order, again, just to make it work for childcare. So there's those sorts of micro level decisions, and then also those opportunity costs, right? So if you're paying for $10,000 for childcare, you are not spending $10,000 to, do needed maintenance on your car or on your house. So you're not putting that into savings. You're not investing that to make more money that you're going to use later to buy a house. There's huge opportunity cost to that too. And then what I think would be most harrowing to me, the parents who are making decisions about their family size, again, not based on desire, not based on preference, not based on feeling like they're ready or not, and not even based on biological factors, but purely based on whether or not they can afford childcare. So I talked to one mother in North Carolina for Crawling Behind. She told me that I've totally washed away the dream of having a third kid because of childcare costs. And so there's a lot of factors that go into how many kids a family has, but we do know that childcare is one of those. And to me, that is deeply opposed to American values of freedom and self-determination. If we're saying the number of children that you have is now determined by whether or not there's childcare in your vicinity, and children in some ways are becoming a luxury good in this country.
Now, most Americans will say, when asked by pollsters, that children are better off being cared for by a parent at home. And a generation ago, that was the norm for married couples. But today, both parents work in 70% of married households with kids. For better or worse, American families want or need two incomes. And whether we approve of that or not, Elliot Haspel says leaving those families to scramble and stretch for childcare hurts all of us.
We pretend it is this individual family obligation that families need to figure it out themselves. They're on their own. It's a market good, right? This is something that much more akin to a gym or a restaurant. We don't place it in this category of being social infrastructure akin to a school or a library or a road or a fire department, or these things that we say are so essential to the functioning of a healthy society that we're going to put public money into it. And let me give you one story here. So I live in Colorado, and there's a small town in western Colorado called Montrose, and about 20,000 people. It's actually quite conservative, and they've been dealing with this childcare crisis, and so they did a community effort to try to understand it better. And part of that, they sort of produced a video, and on that video, you hear the police chief of the Montrose Police Department saying, "I am having officers come up to me and say, because of a lack of childcare, my family and I are leaving." He's saying, we're having trouble keeping enough officers on the street because of childcare. And later on, his deputy says something like, calling the lines of, "You might not be thinking about it, but if the ambulance is 5 minutes slower than it needed to be getting to your house, right, and that affects you or a loved one, like, that actually have a childcare component to it. So you could have no kids, you could hate kids. But the fact is that childcare matters to everyone in American society. Therefore, there is an obligation, in my view, of society to respond by providing support.
Haspel sees public schools as a useful comparison.
Like, we have a public education system in this country which is free at the point of service, and to which, again, we pour an enormous amount of money in. Why? Well, one is because there's a decision that is socially beneficial to have an educated populace. Well, guess what? Learning starts at birth, and therefore childcare is a form of education. Public schools are key community assets, right? It's where we have lots of our performances. It's if there's an emergency, they often serve as shelters, right? They form part of this communal social infrastructure. Well, guess what? So do childcare programs. During various disasters, they're often the only ones that know where their families are. They're often serving as hubs of connectivity where parents are making friends, or getting connections to services or to job opportunities. So you kind of go down the line. And while I'm not suggesting that childcare and public education are exactly the same, public schools are exactly the same thing, it is interesting that we ask those questions about why don't parents just do what they need to do to afford it. For childcare, we don't ask that question for public schools.
Is this a new problem or a new-ish problem in the United States?
It is and it isn't. So there's never been a strong childcare system in the United States, and there's been a long history of the U.S. not wanting mothers of young children to work at all unless they happen to be parents of color. If you want to go way back in history, some of the first childcare providers in this country were enslaved Black girls and women who were forced to take care of the children of their enslavers. And at the same time, to do that, they're forced to leave their own children in very, very large groups, 30, 40, 50, 60 young children who are being cared for, historians tell us, either by one or two elderly enslaved people, or in some cases, actually by very young children themselves. So we have accounts of 3- and 4-year-olds whose job it was to keep the younger babies from walking into the fire. So this is that is part of this story, which we cannot miss, is that there's a very racialized view of who is it okay to have working as mothers. So when I say it isn't a new problem, the acute need for an external childcare system is something that has come about largely over the past 50 years. For a very long time, there were not significant maternal labor force participation outside of the home. That starts to shift really in the late 60s, early 70s. Sort of global economic shifts happen. U.S. manufacturing declines precipitously. It is no longer possible for most families to make it work on one income. And so you see within a decade, by sort of the early 80s, half of mothers of 3 to 5-year-olds are working. And shortly thereafter, you've got up to half of mothers of infants and toddlers working outside the home. And by the mid-90s, it's at 2/3, like I mentioned, and it stayed there. But the idea of all parents are out of the home, and so the kid needs somebody else to care for them, that's actually relatively new.
Was there ever any sort of widespread federal government attempt sort of to say, actually, we're going to do this the way we are doing our public schools?
The closest we came was during World War II. So during World War II, obviously the men all go off to the front, and they need someone work in the factories to build the arsenal of democracy. And we set aside, America sets aside its concerns around women working, and they set up, through what's known as the Lanham Act, a bunch of publicly funded childcare centers at shipyards and other munitions factories across the country. There were about 2,000 of them at the peak of that. They were really high quality, actually. They were well funded. The educators working there were pretty well compensated. They had nurses on site. So they're actually quite good programs. And if you read stories of the women who used them, they found them incredibly useful, not just because they could go to work, but because for the first time they were able to have more of a communal approach to child rearing. They were able to get advice. They were able to talk things out with these, educated and trained teachers and get support. So we do have that for a couple of years. What happens at the end of that story, the World War II ends, all the men come back, there's a brief political fight, and women are by and large sort of told they need to go back into the homes. Lanham Act funding is first cut and then completely eliminated. And so is sort of this momentary episode that just shows us it's possible, but has not resulted in a full transformation of the U.S. childcare system.
Haspel says interest in building a national childcare system spiked again in 1971 with the Comprehensive Child Development Act in Congress.
And this is legislation that would have started the creation of a federally funded, locally run network of childcare programs. It was actually passed on a bipartisan basis in the House and in the Senate. Richard Nixon, when he's campaigning, suggests that he is supportive of this idea. Nixon is also coming forward at that time with something called the Family Assistance Plan, which essentially would have been a guaranteed income for families with children. So there is this moment where it actually feels like the government's going to step up and start to create the kind of lattice work of a family policy.
There was concern, though, from some conservatives who thought the bill would weaken the role of the family in child rearing. Others saw it as an example of unnecessary government overreach, and Cold War politics played a role too.
Those who are concerned about communism, because the USSR did provide some public child care, that was one of their policies, start to gin up a lot of opposition. And Nixon ends up vetoing that bill, but he does it in extremely strong language, basically saying this would be the government taking over a role that is properly done by the family. And it really landed hard. That defeat, combined with economic downturn a few years later, the advocacy movement behind that act, which included everyone from child development groups to the women's groups, like the National Organization of Women were involved. Labor groups were involved. That coalition splinters. And we've never gotten as close, except for Build Back Better a couple of years back. That was the closest we've come since 1971 to having a major piece of child care legislation passed in this country.
Build Back Better was a pandemic recovery bill that would have put billions of dollars toward subsidizing child care centers, capping child care costs at 7% of a family's income, and providing funds for state pre-K programs. It didn't pass. But the federal government has supported American families raising children in other ways. There's the Head Start program, which started in the 60s to provide free early learning for low-income families. And there's the Child Tax Credit, which puts billions of dollars back into the pockets of low and middle-income parents every year.
So the child tax credit as we know it today was passed in 1997, sort of part of the sort of suite of, quote-unquote welfare reform that happened during the Clinton presidency. It's a version of what generally scholars would call a child allowance or a child benefit, and many countries have these. And the logic behind it is when you add a child to your family, you've added a budgetary line item, right? It could cost food, clothing, toys, etc. Like it just costs more. But no one's paying you to have that child, right? So you're not getting more income. Yet, because society benefits from having healthy children, healthy families, there is a compelling reason for the government to provide some sort of cash compensation to parents to help them with general child rearing costs.
The Child Tax Credit, which maxes out for families right now at $2,000 per kid per year, is still very popular among Americans, and it's supported by Democrats and Republicans in Congress, who even boosted it temporarily during the pandemic. One of several unsuccessful attempts to make that increase permanent was even led by Republican Senator Mitt Romney. So could boosting the child tax credit to, say, $3,000 or $4,000 a year per kid fix the childcare problem? Well, Haspel says it would certainly help individual families, but it would not be enough to shore up the system so that childcare centers could pay workers enough to stay in business and offer enough spaces for all the families who need it.
Part of the trouble with the childcare system is there's not enough money in general flowing. And so this is where we kind of get a little bit into the market piece. But if you're a childcare program, like your fixed expenses are extremely high because you need a lot of adult humans to care for little humans. So there are mandated child to adult ratios, right? 1-4 in most states for infants, 1 adult per 4 children, 1 to 6 or 1 to 8 for toddlers. And if you think about, like when I was teaching fourth grade, like I had 25 to 30 kids in my class. If you think about how many people a waiter or waitress serves in a given shift, think how many people a airline gate agent serves in a given shift, right? The costs are just enormous when you lower the ratios to that extent. And so even though these programs are charging $10,000, $12,000 a year, they're actually taking a loss most of the time. They're not getting enough money. And that's why they've had to cut wages to the bone. And I bring all that up to say, so if the $10,000 is inadequate, if it's not the true cost of care, and what you're saying to a family is, right now you're paying $10,000, we're going to, as the government, cover $2,000 of that, so you only have to pay $8,000. That's helpful to the parents. It doesn't do anything for building the system. It doesn't do anything to help get wages up so that we have high quality care and a stable workforce. It doesn't do anything to help there be more supply, more programs opening. It doesn't actually address any of the system level issues.
So your argument then is that it should be government funded and considered a public good, that everyone should fund, even people who do not have children.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to clarify, government funded does not mean government run. You can have government funding a system that is delivered by, by faith-based childcare centers, right? Run out of a church or a mosque or a synagogue. You can have it. Family childcare providers, all much in the same way that you can take your Medicare healthcare dollars, the government funds, and you can take it to a private clinic, right? Like government run and government funded are two different things. So that's an important piece of clarity. But yes, it should be considered part of essential social infrastructure.
And Haspel says families should also get a child care stipend in the range of $15,000 a year per kid, which would come close to covering the average cost of child care in the U.S. right now.
The advantage of funding families directly is families have very diverse and dynamic needs and preferences when it comes to childcare. Some parents prefer to have a grandparent or a neighbor or their sister take care of the child. Some parents want the child in a family childcare program. Some parents want their kid in a faith-based childcare center, some in a secular childcare center. Lots of diversity, and all of those can be great options for parents. And so thought is the best way to empower parents to be able to have those options, including, by the way, paying themselves to take care of their own children, because that's labor, is to provide them with money directly.
And what's the benefit to the taxpayer of paying a parent to stay home and take care of their own kid that they chose to have?
We need a society with a lot of healthy, well-adjusted, well-developed children, right? That's going to benefit in any number of ways. In terms of having the strong, certainly we can look to the future, right? Like you need a strong future workforce that is being innovative, that's entrepreneurial, that's continuing the great American traditions of economic strength. You need children who are able to pay into we have social security system and a Medicare system, right? That is predicated on the idea that there are enough young workers who are making a decent enough money and producing a decent enough amount of GDP to keep that rolling. And then there's a more sort of granular level, like these families, they populate our faith communities. They're the ones that are making communities more vibrant. They're the reason we have parades and block parties and children's museums, like all of those things. There's a scholar who calls this a curb cut effect, right? Curb cuts were originally put into place for individuals in wheelchairs. And what happened when those started to be put into place, it turned out lots of people started using them. Delivery people used them, bikers used them, parents with strollers used them. They weren't the intended audience, but there are lots of ripple effects. And so similarly, because a parent taking care of their own child is leading to healthier families, healthier children, or well-adjusted children who are going to be ready for school. If they're able to do it in a way that's not completely stressing them out, then that's as equally valid an option as sending your kid to the childcare program down the street.
If we're going to spend tax dollars on it, and significant tax dollars on it, would we also have a certain expectation of quality? I mean, would you, in order to qualify, would the parent have to have certain kind of training or certain kind of skills? Like, we're paying for it. We want to make sure kids getting good childcare and safe childcare, for that matter. Yeah,
well, I think this is where we can rely on the idea of the trusted caregiver, right? Parents inherently, and obviously there are exceptions, but I think the overwhelming majority of parents, because of the love that they have for the child, because they have a close relationship to that child, is going to be incentivized to provide good care. So, similarly with a relative, a family member. When you go into those congregate care settings, those settings where it is an unrelated individual caring for a number of unrelated children, that's where licensing comes in. That's where the health and safety requirements come in. That's where inspections come in, things like that. But it's worth reemphasizing that the number one determinant of how a child develops is the presence of safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And what that means is you want caregivers who are not stressed out, right? You want caregivers that are able to be present, who are able to have the time to have quality time with the child, that have the resources to provide a safe and enriching environment. And that doesn't mean we need all sorts of bells and whistles. You don't have to have the baby Einstein stuff. Like, all we're talking about is making sure that families have a base level of stability and not experiencing chronic stress, or sort of we're lowering the risk of any kind of acute trauma or something going really wrong. And financial resources, for better or worse, are the number one way you can ensure that floor, right? Because generally speaking, when you have enough financial resources, you're not having to go and work 3 jobs so that you're never home with it. You're not constantly stressed out because you're trying to figure out, am I going to pay my heating bill or am I going to pay my water bill this month, right? You're not experiencing, you're not living in substandard housing that may have lead or asbestos exposure, right? These things we can mitigate by making sure that families have enough financial resources and by providing them funding to either make access to childcare program, an external childcare program, so they're able to work where they want to work and make a decent outcome, or pay themselves so they're able to establish that type of a household. We're going to be improving child outcomes.
And how much would this cost?
I'll say this. It's a big number. Before I would say the number, I'm going to say two. I want to remind listeners. Country's $800 billion a year, nearly closing in on $1 trillion a year on public K-12 education.
That's how much the U.S. currently spends right now.
Public money. Yep.
Okay.
So $800 billion. And it's over $500 billion on Medicare, over $500 billion on Medicaid. So we've got some big outlays. Most experts say it's going to take us somewhere between $150 and $300 billion a year to have a comprehensive childcare system that covers everyone in the country with well-compensated educators. And I think that is a steal at twice the price because of the benefits you're getting. It's an investment. It's an outlay. There's a reason why we spend so much money on public education in this country. There's a reason why we spend so much money on Medicare and Medicaid in this country. It's because the social benefits, the economic benefits, the national benefits so outweigh the costs. And I think there's an extremely strong argument to be made that childcare belongs in that pantheon of essential public services.
Would you envision also all families getting this, or would it just be, families below a certain income threshold?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I am a strong believer in what's called targeted universalism. What that means is everyone gets some benefits. The people who are most in need, or sort of the lower income brackets, get the most. Right now, today, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, some of the richest people in America, can send their child to their local neighborhood public school for free. They can walk down the street to their local library and check out a book for free. They can go to a local park and have a picnic for free. Could these people pay for those services? Absolutely. But there are some benefits that are so monumental and so worthwhile that we're not going to charge anyone at the point of service. We're going to make richer people, hypothetically, pay more in taxes so that those Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates are paying more on the back end into the system, but they still have access to the benefit. And I think the pandemic shone a really bright light on how important childcare is and how broken childcare is. We've started to see more, at least acknowledgement on both sides of the aisle that this is a problem. There's an agreement yet on how to solve it. There's an agreement yet on how to pay for it. But America needs an answer to the childcare question. Or else the people who suffer, not just going to be American families and American children, it's going to be American society writ large, whether or not you have a young child.
Elliot Haspel's book is called Crawling Behind, America's Childcare Crisis and How to Fix It. And he's a senior fellow at the think tank Capita. He says most of the innovation on the childcare conundrum right now is happening at the state and local level. And we learned about a particularly surprising example in the small town of Warren, Minnesota.
We're known to take the bull by the horns and get it done.
And people are taking note.
It's kind of fun when you introduce yourself and you're like, well, I'm from Warren. They go, really? We watch you guys.
What Warren is up to is next on Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. We'll be right back to today's episode of Top of Mind. But first, are you ready to immerse yourself in the awe-inspiring world of nature? Then I recommend you listen to Constant Wonder. It's another great show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. Join host Marcus Smith in riveting conversations with individuals whose lives have been touched by Earth's beauty and mysteries. Uncover captivating stories that shed light on our planet's wonders, from history to science and beyond. If you crave enriching experiences and a deeper connection with the world around you, tune into Constant Wonder. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. Lindsay Bugler had a 2-year-old and was just about to have another baby back in 2015 when she got some bad news from her childcare center.
Well, 2 p.m. today, we're closing our doors and we're filing for bankruptcy. We're done.
She'd moved to Warren, Minnesota 4 years earlier in 2011. It's a town of fewer than 2,000 people. Most work in agriculture. Bugler's husband works for John Deere, and she's an accountant in a firm that sells crop insurance. Warren was a great fit, she says, except for one thing: childcare. There was only one center in the whole town.
Yep, just the one. Everything else was home daycares. At that time, there was about 8 home daycares in town, plus the center. Also, with us being imports, we're not people that people were familiar with, right? So when we would call the home daycares, they're like, "Oh, I don't know you. There's no way we were getting on their lists." So we ended up with the daycare center, and it was a very limited window that they had available. But we just tried to get in there and then just keep, building that relationship, because we did know we wanted to have more children.
So the news that day in 2015 that the town's one and only childcare center was closing hit hard.
I was like, I have to leave. We have to move. We have to go be closer to family or somewhere where we can have help. Either back to Badette, where my husband's family is from, or Wisconsin, where my family was from. We have friends in, the surrounding area. Grand Forks has a similar issue. Thief River, Crookston. The daycare problem is nationwide. I mean, this is a problem everywhere. And a lot of times the only way to make it is to be closer to family.
And for you, it wasn't an option to stop working?
No. I am a CPA, so I'm very career-oriented. This is what I've always wanted to do. My mom, she's also an accountant, and, she stayed home with us until my youngest brother was in school. And I didn't want to do that because I saw what it did to her career. Once we were all in school, I mean, you kind of go, what now? I have to start at the bottom, and that I didn't want to do that.
The city of Warren's childcare woes are not unusual. 3 in 5 rural communities nationwide are childcare deserts, where the need far exceeds available options. But Warren's response to the prospect of losing its only childcare center was highly unusual. It's believed to be the first city in America to implement a local sales tax for childcare. They tried everything else they could think of first. When Lindsay Bugler's boss learned the daycare was closing that day, he jumped right on the phone.
I work at Phil Thompson and Associates, and I went to Phil Thompson, and I was like, I have to leave. And he was like, hold on. What do you guys need to get you through 30 days? Because we have to give families a little bit of time to try and figure out, what the next step is or what their backup plan is. So he called the city. He's part of the Warren Economic Development Association. In between that and some other private parties, they wrote checks to keep us open for 30 days.
Warren's daycare center is a nonprofit, and Bugler had recently joined the board, so she was front and center in the scramble to right the ship.
A lot of us parents went and got the background checked, fingerprinted, all the stuff so that we can hop in and volunteer, trying to piece together our lunch breaks and cover all the gaps in the schedule and keep staff happy. And we did raise rates. We raised, I think it was like $5 a day.
And you couldn't go higher than that? Was there serious talk about going much higher?
Your parents can only afford so much. We have a lot of wealthy families here, but we also have a lot of not wealthy families here. You're always fighting against what can people actually afford, what can we pay our people, our staff. It's a delicate balance.
So what did you learn that surprised you about the challenges of a daycare, of making it work financially.
First off, just the amount of money that it takes to operate a daycare center. And still, every day we have conversations with people who cannot fathom, because they see how much money that they're sending into the daycare and, in their payment. And they say, well, where does it all go? I'm paying so much money. Where does it all go? And the largest bill is staff. It is very expensive to pay people by the hour, plus their payroll taxes, workers' comp, unemployment. You have to pay for paid time off. It's the staff. The staff is the largest bill, and it gets very expensive very quickly.
Had you been one of those parents before you got involved?
Yes, I was definitely one of those people. I was very frustrated. I was starting out in my career. We weren't making very much either, and you're just forking it all over to daycare, and you're like, I don't understand. Where is it all going?
Are there families that you think have fewer kids than they would have had otherwise if they knew they had childcare options?
We're one. I mean, we have 2 kids, and we did not want to stop at 2, but there was no way that I could go through that again. The constant stress of daycare. I mean, we absolutely would have loved to have another baby. I was like, I can't do it. I can't. Yeah, keep worrying and fighting this hard and working full time and, being a mom to 2 other kids and all these things. So we stopped.
Do you recall there being a moment where there was a recognition that you just couldn't solve it through donations and parent efforts?
I mean, we had multiple town meetings where we would just invite all the public in and say, okay, here's the problem. Here's our issues. Everybody put your heads together to figure out, how can we solve this? How can we get more home daycare ladies to start up or, to reduce their burnout? I mean, we tried to explore every single option out there.
With the help of a state audit, they learned that the core problem was that Warren's childcare center was just too small. In order to be sustainable, it needed to enroll more kids, and for that, it needed more space.
So the state of Minnesota you have to have 1 staff for every 4 babies, and then 1 staff for every 7 toddlers, and 1 staff for every 10 pre-K. And now you also have to have a certain amount of square footage for those kids. So in one of our rooms, our capacity is 10. And now we have to have 2 teachers, even though what would be optimizing is 14 kids with 2 teachers, not 10 kids with 2 teachers. So from a payroll standpoint, it makes it so expensive, and you're going backwards. And it all came down to design the building for the space to optimize your profitability.
They needed a brand new building.
And it really came down to the best way to make this thing flourish is to have the building be paid for. Our neighboring communities have a sales tax for their hockey arena. And so that we were like, well, why not have it be for daycare? To pay for the daycare building.
Was that kind of a light bulb, well, this seems obvious kind of a thing?
Well, it was kind of it's always been a joke about the hockey arenas, and we all go there, and you buy clothing and you go shopping over there, and yeah, we're paying for hockey arenas. Why not have it be for daycare and actually benefit the whole community?
The plan was for the city to issue a bond to build the new child care center and pay for it with a 0.5% tax on most goods and services sold in Warren for the next 20 years. The state legislature signed off, but the plan also had to be approved by voters in Warren.
It passed by, I think it was 14 votes. Yeah.
What was the campaigning like for that?
We did a lot of newspaper publishings. There was a weekly article that went out about why this is so important. We did a lot of town hall meetings. We had a lot of older generation people who came because they were very upset. They didn't want the city to have to subsidize for childcare when it wasn't going to affect them, right? They're like, my kids are, long and raised, and I don't want to have to, have my city be spending money on this. Some of the biggest naysayers are people who are over 50 years old. So
Even women?
even women, yeah, they say, well, I raised my kids and my neighbors help, and we don't have that anymore. We don't have our neighbor lady who can pop over, and because they're all working too. Eventually they did start to, just through all these meetings and trying to involve everybody, the knowledge around the issue and just how vast the problem can start to spread to those individuals. Your our school can't hire teachers because they don't have daycare. The hospital can't hire nurses because they don't have daycare. Then just all the regular businesses too. It's a huge problem, and those businesses are no longer going to be able to offer services. The school is going to end up going down the road, and we'll all be driving to East Grand Forks for school, and you don't have nurses, doctors, county workers, gas station. I mean, it's everything. If all of those people have to stay home and take care of their kids, you have that many less people that are able to be in the workforce, and we need them.
Warren's new childcare building is expected to open summer of 2024. The city will own it. The nonprofit that runs the childcare will use it rent-free and cover its own costs, namely salaries, through fees that parents pay. And they'll have room for a lot more kids.
The current center we're licensed for 47. The new center is going to be licensed for 110. So the capacity is going up, and that is going to be, it's going to be huge.
I don't know how unusual this is, but the community, at least community government there in Warren, has been tremendously supportive of childcare.
Yes.
For a long time now, for at least 10 years.
They're phenomenal. I mean, they're amazing. We're told from some of our state legislature members, and they're like, we always watch Warren. You guys are kind of the pilot program for a lot of things. If there's something that needs to be done, Warren's just like, all right, let's do it. We're on it. So it's kind of fun when you introduce yourselves and you're like, well, I'm from Warren. They go, really? We watch you guys. So it is fun. We're known to just take the bull by the horns and get it done. If there's a need, they're just going to put their heads together and figure it out and have it happen. It's kind of magic.
What does it feel like as a parent, relying so heavily on childcare?
Oh, that's why we never left. My husband's on the city council now. I've been on the daycare board for 7 years. We're hardcore community members, and that's exactly why. It's because when you're in a community that cares so much about you, you just want to jump in and start helping everybody else too, right? It just feels so good. It's like I said, we're just a huge family, and everybody takes care of everybody. How could you leave?
Lindsay Bugler lives in Warren, Minnesota with her family, and she recently left the daycare's board, but she's still involved with the city's initiatives to support families. Next time on Top of Mind, we're taking a closer look at the home front in America, how parents have traditionally divided chores and child rearing, and some pretty big ways that that's changing right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. We touched on some things that many of us hold dear and feel strongly about. So what perspectives challenged you or surprised you? Email topofmind@byu.edu or reach out on social media. We are at topofmindpod. Top of Mind is a BYU radio podcast. Today's episode was produced by Vanessa Goodman and James Hoops, with help from Samuel Benson, Sam Payne, and me. Our audio engineer and sound design team includes Brandon Lewis, Josh Fouts, and Trent Reimschüssel. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk again in 2 weeks.